Welcome to Wednesdays with Willa. I am your host, Willa White, and this is my weekly podcast show that airs on Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. Eastern on my Facebook page, Willa White Medium. This also goes out on the Lilydale Assembly Facebook page, so you can find it there, as well as my YouTube channel and Blog Talk Radio. I'm part of the Lilydale Radio family, so there are lots of shows to tune into throughout the week, and I encourage you to do so. My particular show features spiritualism, mediumship, healing, faith, family, and more. And I've had a lot of great guests over the years. This is year 6 of Wednesdays with Willa. And so you have lots of shows to look back at and enjoy the archive videos of so many great guests and so many great topics. And today we're going to be focusing on life after death. And today I have on the show with me Dr. Raymond Moody. And for those of you who don't know who he is a well-known author, a professor and public speaker. And throughout his 5-decade career, Dr. Moody has explored themes related to many aspects of death, dying, and grief. Dr. Moody is a doctor twice over with a PhD in philosophy and an MD, and he's able to merge those two areas of study and experience together. And his interest in the afterlife became a major focus of his life's work. And over the years, he's heard thousands, yes, you heard me right, thousands of accounts of near death, shared death, and after death experiences. He's written numerous books on those subjects. And in one of his first books, Life After Life, he is credited with coining the term near-death experience in 1975. Dr. Moody will be presenting workshops this summer at Lilydale during the near-death experience weekend. So mark your calendars and make plans to attend his workshops this July 14th, 15th, and 16th. I have posted links to make it easier for you to purchase tickets and VIP tickets to these special events. And now I am delighted to welcome to the show today, Dr. Moody, as we explore some of the most fascinating frontiers of life and death. Thanks for being on the show today.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm just delighted to be on the program.
Oh, thank you. I've been having a great time interviewing some of the other folks that are part of the near-death experience weekend, Dr. Eben Alexander, Karen Newell, and Dr. Christopher Kerr. And they have all bringing different insights to this discussion of near-death, and then also what's happening at end of life, and what's happening in the next realm. And I think it's beautiful that you will be part of this special weekend to really reinforce understandings about the afterlife. And I know you bring a lot of great insights to the table. So how about you, in a nutshell, and if it's possible, to share with us today a little bit about some of the greatest discoveries you've made personally as you've been researching and studying and being part of this experience?
Well, I came to this actually not intending to. I was not raised in a religious environment, and the idea of an afterlife to me was, I honestly thought it was not anything serious. I thought it was like only in cartoons and such. But anyway, I was just focused on astronomy. And so at the age of 18, I went to the University of Virginia intent on studying astronomy. But my first day, actually, in my philosophy class, decided I was going to major in philosophy because I was reading Plato's Republic, and I immediately got hooked. And at the end of the Republic, there's this story about a warrior who was believed dead on the battlefield but revived during his funeral, and told this story of going into another world and getting out of his body and so on. And I was curious about that. I mean, the fact that Plato obviously took this very seriously impressed me. So I asked my professor about it. And he said, yeah, that these early Greek philosophers studied cases of people who were believed dead, but somehow revived. And that there was two schools of opinion. One was Plato's, where he took these seriously as an indicator of an afterlife. But Democritus, about the same time, who was he had figured out that things are made of atoms.
Mhm.
And just like the physiologically minded tell us today, he said, well, this, even though the body may appear dead, there's some residual biological activity, but too small to be seen by the eyes. And so that, I knew of this as a debate in early philosophy, but I mean, it never really occurred to me that it might be still something going on. I mean, in 1965, about a little over 3 years later, I heard from one of my professors that right there in Charlottesville was Dr. George Ritchie, who was a professor of psychiatry there, who had had such an experience. So George was the first one I heard. I went on and I heard some more while I was an undergraduate and graduate student there, one more. But then I went to be a philosophy professor at East Carolina University. Heard a lot of these from my students and from my colleagues when they knew that I was interested in it and so on. And so by the time I went to medical school, I had quite a number of people I'd interviewed already. So that's how it kind of evolved. And, I knew right away that it was a very common thing because I knew that it was known to the Greeks, but the reason I figured why that it was just suddenly remanifesting in the modern world was I assumed the advent of CPR and the techniques for resuscitating people. So by the time the book was published, I knew full well that anybody who cared to just look around for themselves were going to find pretty much the same thing.
Yes.
So that's how it got started.
Oh,
And that was 1962 when I heard about it.
Amazing. And you were able to put those pieces together that for some of us we would say that's common sense to put those pieces together in that particular way. But it's difficult for people who have a different mindset or perhaps come from a medical idea of death and dying. And they're a little bit too concentrated on what the body's doing instead of the essence, the being, the soul, and what happens in that experience.
Yeah, I mean, I love science. I've studied a lot of science, and I'm interested particularly in astronomy, but particle physics, a lot of stuff I'm interested in. But science is not the correct discipline to study the question of an afterlife. That's still, I think, a philosophical question, and one that I think we're headed toward a new way of answering it. I do.
So, in terms of giving us insights to that, what is it that you're feeling will be that new insight or part of that experience of the new insight?
Well, I think, people have been just kind of running against a wall for centuries, trying to solve the question of life after death with the mind we have, right? But if you really look at the history of all this, there's a great history behind it. The notion of an afterlife that we have it, as we have it, largely came through Plato, and the reason is that his investigation of the question of life after death, which is his dialogue, The Fade Out. I mean, it's just an absolutely amazing piece of work. And it's still, he sort of described the parameters for rational investigation of the afterlife. And so when the Christian church was formed, 300, 400 years later, that was the best they had. So the Christians took the Phaedo, which is the Plato's work on the afterlife, and that is the official theology of the Christian church. And so what that did was that it sort of blocked progress on that question again, right, for some couple of thousand years. But where it really sort of came loose is since the modern philosophers have really pointed out the difficulties, right? Like the great David Hume, who influenced Einstein, for example. He pointed out that the logic we have just doesn't work for the afterlife. It's a question that's outside of Aristotelian logic as we have it. And then later on, toward the turn of the 20th century, the so-called logical positivist, it was a whole new way of thinking about logic and verification and so on. And they come up with the point, which is still very much pretty good. If you think about people who don't think about it either way as belief or disbelief, right? But rather people who just want to find out where the limits are, then that's the philosophers. And A.J. Ayer had pointed out that when you really think about it, even though the question of the idea of life after death may bring beautiful images to your mind and good feelings, that really in terms of cognitive content, there's not anything there. And the way Ayer put it was to say that it's a self-contradiction, he said it makes sense to say that a man survived a total change of personality, but he said, it doesn't. It's a self-contradiction to say that a man survives the annihilation of his body. Whereas Woody Allen, I guess, put that, he said, if you can survive death, you can survive pretty much anything. Right?
Yes.
So, and that is the real deal. There are many people who just don't want to face it. But if you really look at it as a rational problem, that's the fact. Now, where I'm saying is that the whole way we've looked at it previously assumes that our mind, we try to solve the problem with the mind we have, right? But Hume and Ayer and others have pointed out that's just not going to work. The mind we have is not adequate to it. Well, then I'm going to say, right now, because I studied philosophy, and in philosophy, paradoxically, you want people to try to refute you because it's like you try to put your view out there as well as you can, but then you put it out there and you hope if one of your colleagues finds something formal in it, well, that's good because then I'm closer to the truth, right, by seeing my mistake. But on the other hand, if your colleagues read it, they can't find any holes in it, then that gives you some confidence that you're on the right track. So anyway, what I am happy to say right now, is that I've developed a procedure over the years that I taught philosophy. I was a psychiatrist, I developed a technique whereby we can actually prepare our minds in advance so that subsequently, when we have a near-death experience, we'll be able to put it into whole new kinds of expressions. And the most common thing with people with near-death experiences say is no matter how articulate or well-educated or brilliant or however many languages they speak, they say, I just can't describe it to you. There are no words. Or William James called that ineffability. But now say we have a way around this. And basically, it's complex to describe. I'll sketch it out in
yes, please.
Lilydale.
Yes.
I'll sketch it out in Lilydale when we come. But it's just a way of exercises so that you can think about things that don't make sense in a whole new way. It has a lot of other implications and uses too. But in this case, the idea is, as I'll point out in the program is like you can go through processes where you get your mind ready for such an event. And then when it happens, you'll have whole new ways to articulate it. I'm happy to say that it's already happened once to my knowledge. A very brilliant and wonderful man. He was both a scientist and also an eminent sculptor. And he was in one of my seminars years ago, and then several years later, he developed H1N1. He was in the hospital for 60 days, lost his leg to gangrene. And as I recall, I think there was 3 cardiac arrests. But during one of them, he said that his mind went back to the seminar that he was in. And he said, and I saw that what you're saying is true. He said, you can't comprehend how that world is connected to this world unless you take the unintelligibility axis into account. And that sounds kind of abstract, but we'll explain it all. And the good news here is that we don't have to worry anymore that our minds are adequate to the question of life after death. Now we can fix that. So there are whole new ways, which are already underway, where we will be able to kind of hone in on the afterlife, get a better read on where it is in effect.
Excellent. It's very exciting that you'll be able to share that with people. And it is something that for many folks, they feel is inaccessible to them. As a medium, people come to me, and a vast majority of them haven't necessarily felt like they had contact with their loved ones in spirit. But then through a medium, they can see how they're having contact right then and there, and things are starting to open up for them. And then many times they'll go home and they'll start having experiences because they've just been opened. Now, that doesn't, it can't happen necessarily immediately like that. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time. But I do think that the more people are in that particular vibrational frequency of acceptance and being excited and having the enthusiasm to connect with love to their loved ones in spirit and to their own soul, the more that is possible for them.
Yeah, I have the same experience. You might have heard I had studied the ancient Greek psychomantions, or oracles of the dead, where they had techniques for enabling people to visualize spirits. And I operated that for some couple of decades, guiding people through it. And it's like you say, it's like sometimes people would not see an apparition in the chamber where they were in at my place, or maybe they would. But either way, whether they did or whether they didn't, they would often have some sort of follow-up after they got home, where if they had seen the apparition would appear later in their own quarters. Yeah, it's. I think you're right. There are things that can kind of open people up to these talents that many of us have, but are not aware.
Yes, because they haven't been working themselves in that particular way, and sometimes it's a bit like a muscle, right? You have to train it up a bit.
I think it is to some degree. Yeah. That's right. In my case, I had 2 doctoral degrees before I was 31 years old, plus 3 of those years I'd been a philosophy professor. So you're not nearly as old as me, but you're old enough to realize that there was something very wrong with somebody who had 2 doctoral degrees before they were 31. And it was really true. I mean, my whole life was my nose in a book. But then in 1985, I developed thyroid disease, and I had to stop all that work, and until I got better. And it was in that time that I really realized, these talents of a non-intellectual nature that I had, which I just not known, suddenly I began to be able to go into kind of what we call altered states of consciousness.
It's fascinating to me that people, at whatever age is right to them, they will explore that. A lot of people, because they've had some sort of health crisis or someone around them has passed, there's been a mortality issue that's occurred within their own life. And it's like the fire. It all of a sudden is ignited within them to be a certain way that's different from before.
See, that was what hooked me on Plato from the very beginning, because that's how the Republic began. Socrates is about 20 years old at the time. He meets up with this old guy who's maybe 60s or 70s. And he says, what's life like for you at your age? And he said, well, Socrates, I was very successful in my business. I made a lot of money, but now here I am at this age, and all those stories I heard when I was a kid about the afterlife come back. And people, in that situation often develop a kind of sense of urgency for it. Or as you're saying there, if they lose a loved one to death, or if they're faced with the prospect of a terminal illness, that's when many people start thinking about the afterlife.
It's something that I think there has to be that little edge of, oh no, it could happen. It's really here, and it could be that first step for them. I know one of the fascinating folks from history is Emanuel Swedenborg. I don't know if you've read anything by him. And in the 1700s, he was this incredible scientist who worked for the nation and it's of Sweden. And he did so many inventions. He even sketched out a flying machine. And
That's right.
he at the age of 53 is when he started to develop that spiritual side of himself and really explore the world of spirit. And so all of that great mind of his, it's not something he could necessarily apply to these spiritual experiences, but it did help him to want to dive in more and to be investigatory and really see it through to a culmination of understanding. So beautiful.
Yeah. He's still, a lot of people still follow his writings.
I remember even Helen Keller when she was alive. She really enjoyed him.
Yeah. And William Blake.
Yes. Yeah. There was a revival about him. That's just kind of fascinating.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's a revival among that particular group because they all knew each other. And then, every now and then you'll hear Swedenborg's name come up because someone's found it again. But it's fascinating to me that people think that if you're young, you can't understand this. If you're old, you're too close to death anyway. People have these belief systems that get in the way of them going ahead and exploring that spiritual side of life. And maybe it's a phase of life that they're in, growing in children, growing a career, however that works for them. But sometimes you just have to wait until it's happening. It's something you have to say, I'm in it. I'm in the current of this. I'm going to see where the river takes me.
Yes. I in my life I can't help thinking. I love doing it, but there is a kind of point where you get where you're thinking too much, and there's a certain amount of value in I've often thought that if you spend your whole life here thinking about what life after death is, then you might get over there and say, oh my goodness, I spent my whole life there trying to figure out what here is like. But I can't help it. I'm just hooked. It's it's such a fascinating subject.
It's that feeling of the two worlds that is happening simultaneously, the dimensions that we sometimes feel we can touch, and sometimes know we have touched. And
Yes,
that
that's
we can't be in that 24/7 because it would be an unhealthy thing. We have to be living our lives and bring that same spiritual joy we feel about that other realm to this one.
yeah. Life is an immersive experience,
Yeah.
and if where I've come to it after all these years is, it looks to me like this place is the best way to describe it is a theater, and that I think that the way I think of it is we are God's stories, kind of. And
Yeah.
when people have their near-death experience and find themselves looking at their life review, their review of their life, they're very impressed that God has sort of followed along with their life story. Right? So we are stories, and I've gotten to the point in my life where I can see that all the time, pretty much. But it's like, you'd have little flashes of it in the previous parts of your life, but then the cop car would zoom by outside with the siren. The the little small plane would crash in your backyard, or the dog, whatever. But so the world is always kind of bringing itself to your attention in a forceful way.
Yeah.
But and so for a long time I could have those little flashes of insight, but then something would happen. But where I am now is I can pretty much have both the channels going at once, and I can realize, yeah, this is a kind of shadow show, like Plato said. I mean, it has purposes we're using, and we're learning things and such. But, it is kind of an illusion, and you can kind of maintain both of those thoughts at once. I think.
Yeah, the Maya, the illusion of what's going on.
Yeah,
But
that's right.
and being yet in that space of achieving some measure of super consciousness, the way Andrew Jackson Davis described it.
Yeah, and also, bringing good things to the other people who are involved in this show. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So in terms of, you back to this idea of the stories, because that's what I enjoy too when I meet people, or whether they're in spirit or in their living. I find myself fascinated by the stories, and that there are so many stories that you've heard, and it had those closeness with people who have been near death and shared death and after death. And do you feel that there's a uniqueness to their stories, but what are some of the ribbons and the threads that you feel are the same?
Well, as I've interviewed people from a lot of different parts of the world, and the way thousands of people actually, and the way I put it together is, if you look at several hundred stories, then you see this pattern whereby you can see, say, about 15 or 17 or 18 common elements that crop up in the accounts, right? But and they include, for example, people say that they may hear the doctor or nurse say, "Oh my God, he's dead. We've lost him," something like that. But they say that from their point of view, far from feeling dead, they feel more awake and aware and alive they've ever felt. And they say they get out of their body and they look from above. They can see the doctors and nurses trying to uh, resuscitate their bodies. They say at this point they enter into these profound states of consciousness that are just, you say, there are no words, just in a situation which is the most astonishing thing you've ever seen, but the words fail. And they say that they go through a passageway of some sort, and they come out on the other side into this incredibly brilliant and warm and loving light, in which they say relatives or friends of theirs have already died, seem to be there in spirit form to meet them and to help them through this. They say they see everything they've ever done in a panorama, like time stands still and you re-witness everything you've ever done from the point of view not just of yourself, but of the other people with whom you've interacted. This often takes place in the company of a being of complete compassion and love, which people say it, a light, who sort of helps you through this and helps you understand this. And then at some point they have to say, I had to come back. They may have no idea, like, one moment I was in the light, the next moment I was back in my body. Others say that they were told they had to go back, that they had things left to complete. And then yet another group was saying that they were given a choice, that they could either continue with the experience they were having or come back to this life. And all the ones I've talked to obviously made that decision. But when they do, it's almost invariably because of kids. They say, for myself, I would rather have gone. I chose to come back to raise my children, or on behalf of somebody else who's in need.
Do you feel that death ultimately is between the individual soul and God?
Yeah, I do. I just, I've never been able to be a physicalist, Willa. I mean, even when I was a kid, I understood that I can be sure that I'm conscious now. But, I realized even as a very young kid that the reason why you think there's an external physical world of objects is persistence, right? It's like the table stays at that same location. But, it's like, that doesn't mean that the cause of that regularity is an external physical world. There could be all kinds of other reasons, or this could be like a theater and you're receiving images. It's like Plato's idea was people imprisoned in a cave underground watching shadows on the wall,
like reality TV or something.
Yeah. So, but I love science and I study it and I study about physicality, but I tend to think it's that the primary reality is consciousness, and that what appears to be the physical world is a projection of that consciousness.
Yes, it's a projection of that consciousness that can go beyond the so-called earthly plane and have those associations. And having had those experiences with other people and then your own, would you say that some of the greatest insights have been when you're alone or with other people?
You mean when you're dying?
Well, I mean, in terms of when you are having these moments of recognition of what's going on, does it happen when you are just cogitating, shall we say, by yourself? Or does it happen when you're interacting with people that you start to see that? Because for me, it's in the interaction with people that I see God in them. I see the divine energy that's so strongly present in them. And because I'm able to see their soul, if you will, I can feel the deeper vibrational frequency connection with them. And it just affirms for me that we are part of God. It crashes any kind of illusionary idea that we're separate.
That's a great idea. Well, I see what you're talking about. Yeah, exactly. And it's like the way I say that is that to me, kind of all of reality is God. You know that thing that Meister Eckhart said, the eyes with which I see God are the same eyes with which God sees me. Or another way I've heard that's expressed is that we are the fingertips of God. And the way I look at it, every little fingertip of God is everyone. It's like that whole me as the being is inquiring into knowledge. That little bud is God, and so is the years too. See,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a beautiful imagery. It also brings to mind the Sistine Chapel, right? when,
oh yeah,
when you touch God, there's that spark of the divine
yeah.
that
That's a
happens.
very powerful image.
Hmm. And I was wondering if you would speak a bit about shared death experiences.
Yeah, yeah, that's one reason. I never have, like I said, physicalism. It's impressive in many ways, but I just can't. I can't make that gap.
Sure.
But I the whole way we have in the West, the whole near-death experience is captive to a sort of way that we have of processing, and it goes back to Plato and um, Democritus, like I said. And today it's between the people who take these seriously as indicators of an afterlife, but the other group who says, oh, it's just now they call it oxygen deprivation to the brain. So, but the trouble with that to me has always been that the bystanders at the death of someone else, the bystanders themselves not being ill or injured, very commonly have all of these various elements that we think of as a near-death experience. Like when grandma is dying in the bed, the grandson may say, well, as grandma was dying, I got out of my body and went part way toward this light. With people say that they see apparitions of the deceased, the dying person's loved ones coming into the room, or the room fills with light. And I even have a number of cases where the bystanders, empathically co-lived the dying life review of the person who was passing away. So, I mean, you can kind of understand how people are that way, because there are just some people who are just terrified to admit they don't know, right? But to me, I'm happy as hell. I don't know. But, for people who have to have it, they're believing by the numbers kind of. This is a good way to divide, go to your corner, and I'm going to say it's oxygen deprivation. I'm going to say it's life after death. But the trouble is, both sides kind of ignore the fact that bystanders have this happen too, and they're not, oxygen.
That's right. They're having they're in good shape compared to the one dying. And
That's right.
and they're having that experience, and it's real. And I say often that personal experience trumps everything. Until you've had the personal experience yourself, it's hard to understand it. People can kind of brush up against it. But when you have an experience as you've just described, it's inescapable. It becomes the absolute understanding of this is the truth with the capital T, and that this brings comfort, but it also brings a solidity to that belief system. It does, if you move out of believing and into knowing.
Yeah, and yes, that's right. People say that this is a life-changing event. That's right. And never again are they the same. Whatever they were chasing before. I mean, I've spent my life chasing knowledge, right? Some people have spent their life chasing power or money or fame or whatever they chase. But whatever people were chasing before this experience, they come back and they say, well, what this is all about is love. It's learning to love. And also another thing they do say, though, it's like, it's very often it happens that when there's part of their life reviews, it shows some theme that in which they have been learning something.
Yes.
That I've heard a lot of people say this, that this being is interested. People say there's not words, right? But the thoughts are unmistakable. Okay, and that they say that when you see things in your life there where you've been learning, that the message that comes from this being is that who seems interested in this, that the message is, as George Ritchie said, he said that this process of learning doesn't stop when you die. And he said, the process of learning, he said, I gather, goes on quite literally for eternity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Spiritual progression is eternal and infinite. There's always something more to learn and grow and be. And I find that to be very exciting.
It's just so wonderful. And I am so, I just am so, I rejoice in my ignorance. Well, I mean, in the sense that when I was 7 or 8, looking through that telescope and having the thought that you did too, everybody does it something. Like, how big is this thing we're in? Right? So your mind zips out to the wall. But then you scratch your head. Just a minute, doesn't have to be something on the other side of a wall. So, but then your mind says, well, the only other option seems to be that it goes on forever. And that makes no sense either. So I really became acutely aware when I was 7 or 8 years old that I was ignorant and would never know much of anything at all. But that the nice thing about that is that you value the things that you can know and that you do pick up along the way. But it's knowing full well that, holy mackerel, what a joke. I've read in the last year, because I moved and I just rearranged my office, my workspace. I'd never counted books before, but just this past year, I've read 185 books, all of them university press books. I mean, I read plenty of comic books too, but I don't count those. Yeah. And I got my complete collection of Donald Ducks and Uncle Scrooge's go to my grandson has them now, but I'm a comic book reader too, see, so. But I mean academic books, and it's just, what a great blessing that we're in this. I can spend like maybe $10 or $15 or $20 to get a book that a scholar spent 10 years of his or her life, meticulously researching, and I can get it for, $20. Holy mackerel.
I know, it's incredible what we have access to, and the knowledge bank of the world, right?
Yep.
I was wondering if you could speak a bit to your own mediumship experiences, if you would, just briefly share things that you feel have become more accessible to you in terms of your own reunions with loved ones that you've had, the recognition of their presence around you, and what that's brought you.
Well, yeah, I guess so. My wife is, I hate to tell you her IQ. It's just it's astonishing. She's just extremely brilliant. And, but she's totally non-intellectual. It's just great. She went to art school. She studied fashion and stuff.
Sure.
So it's just good. It's great for me.
Oh, the balancing, yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, and Cheryl is really, she is a solid person. Well, about 4 years ago, I guess we were standing in the living room, and she said, I remember the look on her face. She said, I can see dead people. And the funniest thing was, right around that time, I was going through a spell of it too. And why does that happen? I don't know. Why should, 4 years ago, Cheryl suddenly start seeing dead people? And I was seeing them too. And I was trying to explain to this man that came to our house a few weeks later. I was saying, it's like you don't really see the feet. It's just like they kind of moving around. And he said, they glide. And I said, yeah. And he said, yeah, I've seen it too. And boy, is that. But the trouble is, it's, you got to pay a lot of attention to this world to make you have the illusion that it's real. Because there's so many things in life that just sort of indicate that it's, that something is fishy. Before I went to medical school, I had a PhD in philosophy, then I was a philosophy professor for 3 years. So then I went to medical school, then I became a psychiatrist. So I was living in this little town. And in many little towns, it's like, how would you feel, for example, if you went to the local mental health clinic and saw the chief of police sitting in the waiting room, or the mayor, or the town celebrities, right? I mean, it's not that you're favoritism. It's just that it's to respect people. You don't want the chief of police coming to see a psychiatrist at the, in the mental health clinic. So something has to be done. So I was it, because I was older than the other residents. And I was known for my book. So for a year, I was in the geriatrics clinic where the town celebrities or authors and officials, come. And most of them, it was just, loneliness, or situational stress. And repeatedly during that year, I heard the same formulations. Raymond, it's like the older I get, the more I felt when I look back in my life, I have this uncanny feeling that it's been like a play or a drama or a movie or a story. They would use different words. And what I've noticed in my life as I've grown older, the older you get, it's like more and more people, as they age, they've had some sort of experience where they cross over to some other dimension of reality. I think, and I'm sure you've noticed that too. Yeah. It's just like, the older people get, the more likely it is that they've had some sort of crossover event where they went to some other world.
I call that toe dipping.
Yeah, I've had a number of them like that. But you can't pay too much attention to it, because then the phone rings, right? It's like this is set up to be, number one, relentless. There's no slowdown to it. It's just coming at you, just zoom. And you don't have much time to reflect that it's just a dream or a story, but it is.
Yeah, I guess Shakespeare got it right. All the roles to play, right? Mere actors. But in terms in terms of connecting this a little bit more, I know our time's almost up, but I wanted to just connect some of those understandings a little bit in terms of the afterlife. We have the mediumship, we have the afterlife experience that people are having, we have the near-death experience, and those shared death experiences, and they're all somewhat unique. But the words that I notice, the patterns I suppose I notice, is that first of all, it's ineffable. Yes. Second, that it's not so much about the words, it's about the feeling that's associated with it. It usually has a multi-sensory experience that's coming through in those moments. And it's as if you're able to talk with the spirit around you. It's soul to soul. It's not this verbal understanding, which is why as mediums we could connect with people who come from another country and speak a different language, and it's not a problem. The language is not a barrier, because uh, that goes out the window, and you're just left with being human.
Yeah.
And with pets, is no language. There's only that language of love that exists. So for me, it seems that the patterns emerge that no matter whether it's a near death, an afterlife, or even in this one, it's all about experiencing that vibrational frequency of love, seeing it in other people, doing our best to bring that out in other people, and recognizing that we can invoke life.
Yeah. And it's like here, it's like the axes of orientation are time and space, right?
Yeah.
But in that next one place is no time and space. So I asked Eben, I said, Eben, what is the coordinate system there? And he said, love and knowledge. Uh-huh.
Two good words for you, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure you were like, yes, Eben, I want to hear those are the two words.
Yeah. I've heard quite a number of people over the years talk about institutions of higher learning.
Yes.
These are all people who the cardiac arrests were so lengthy that it defies the medical books, but they do happen.
Yes.
And sometimes people, it's like I had a good friend who her doctor said she was dead for 40 minutes. And he said the reason he decided to resuscitate had nothing to do with anything medical. It was really personal. And that, it's like, and in those extremely lengthy cardiac arrests, where it defies all medical knowledge, are the ones where people seem to see these things that go beyond what I've talked about, like to see realms of knowledge and cities of light.
Yeah, cities of light, realms of knowledge, and that is accessible to us to some extent. Certain folks have been able to get there. I know I've been blessed to have those in spirit tell me about it, and also show me things about it. And that does seem to be something that those in spirit recognize, especially if I'm talking to someone who used to be a scientist or used to be an author, or someone who was so interested in life. They're the ones that come back and are able to express about those things from spirit. So there's a unified connection and outlook that would agree with what you just said.
Yeah. I'm just happy to say, I don't know is the easiest thing that comes to my mind, but I've reached the point where I was a professor of logic. I realized full well the reasons why logic as we know it isn't capable of giving a logical inference that there's an afterlife. Where I am with it is, Holly, is I give up. Well, as I give up. I mean, I've always been able to think myself out of things all my life, but I can't think my way out of this. And I just, to my utter astonishment, I gather there really is an afterlife.
So you can't think your way out of it, but you can be your way through it. And I think that's
yeah. Just fully aware that, I get it. And I'm still, here I am still puzzled about many of the details, but just sort of going along and doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
I think you absolutely are. Any last things you'd like to share with folks before we close for today?
Well, just that thank you so much for listening in, and I can't wait to come up to Lilydale. I'm really looking forward to this, and I'm just thanks so much everybody there for the invitation. I'm so looking forward to being there in July.
And so it's going to be great to have you here in Lilydale, and for those of you who need to hear this again, Dr. Raymond Moody is going to be here in July this year on July 14th, 15th, and 16th. And you could get tickets so you can attend the workshops. There are even VIP tickets for special reserve seating and private reception with autograph and photos. So you want to get on that because there are a limited number of those kinds of VIP tickets. And it's an opportunity for you to be with Dr. Raymond Moody and also the many other events that are going on in Lilydale. So I refer you to the lilydaleassembly.org website for more information, for tickets, to register, and to be part of this beautiful 2023 summer season that Lilydale has in store for all of us. Thank you again for being on the show today, Dr. Raymond Moody. We appreciate you so much, and it'll be great to have you here and see you in person. All right, everyone, have a good week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.